Hey gang, Kahuna here. Trying something a little different this week. In the past few weeks, every time I've tried to go on a Sunday, things have just gone straight in the toilet. The main reason is I seem to be losing bandwidth and can't get things out to you guys. So, what I've decided to do this week is this show is entirely pre-recorded. While I'm recording this, you may hear in the background, that's World Anvil's mega stream going on, which has been fun so far. They won't be on during my readings. But what I'm going to do is pre-record all these readings, kind of string them together, edit it all together, so that you guys can get the same Kahuna Reads stream without the crap that we've gone through technically. Like I said, it appears to be a bandwidth thing on Sundays. I have a hunch that the NFL is, sucking up bandwidth when it comes to people streaming multiple games. So this is my solution. Sorry, excuse me. I'm not going to edit it much for those kind of things. I may edit for mistakes. But I will join you guys in the chat. I'm probably already there. So, if you're in the chat, awesome. The great thing about this is all of them will be there. I will know ahead of time who I'm reading, so I will be able to put it all out there. You guys will know ahead of time, and this will go very quickly into the video on demand if you want to take it in. So, that's where we stand. That's my little explanation as to what is going on. So now, it's time to do some reading.
The flaming drinks common in bars around the Carinal Pit represent the pit itself. A sweet liqueur represents the goodness of life. The fire represents the conflict. Sorry, recruits, I can't keep a straight face on this one. We like flaming drinks because they're fun. Sergeant Killflare. Legend says that the first flaming drinks were made at Tito Corbin's cavern in Dallinkat Bay. He used cheap alcohol that had to have the impurities burned and the taste masked with sugary juices. The bartenders made a great show of selling high-proof spirits on fire and transferring them from glass to glass, sometimes with magic. The fiery show also made it easier for the unscrupulous Tito Corbin to send his pickpockets through the credulous crowds. Unfortunately for Corbin, the dockside bars were frequented by smugglers and pirates. Once they caught wind of his schemes, the outlaws doused him in his own cheap liquor and set him on fire. To this day, the Tito Corbin is still drunk in his honor. Tito Corbin's pyre, making this drink is both a performance and a prayer. High-proof rum, a spoonful of sugar, and water are mixed in a metal cup. It's lit on fire and poured back and forth between metal cups, arcing fire dramatically. The drink is served with a garnish of bacon and a prayer in memory of Tito Corbin. Tito Corbin set his drinks on fire, then stole his patron's gold. Pirates threw him on a pyre. Now Tito Corbin's never cold. As the custom of drinks that are on fire spread, every bar in every town came up with their own version. The most popular include Firebomb, a line of high-proof shots are lined up on a bar and set ablaze, all at once with a cantrip. Devil's nectar. A blazing spiral of citrus peel rises out of a mixture of coffee, brandy, and liqueur. Soul pepper. A favorite of students at WPU and new recruits on the pit as a rite of passage. A sweet liqueur in a shot glass is set on fire, then dropped into a pint of beer. The whole drink must be chugged all at once to avoid the ridicule of their peers.
Hope that wasn't too bad a bane. When the threat is shelf level or greater, the vigilance holds guarding position. Rarely is there a need for more than one vigilance to be required. The hunters are loyal to the chief and have been since the founding of the units. These warriors were first commissioned during the unending war, when they were needed for protection of the land against the other races and nations. Though they were some of the first to recognize the wisdom of the druids of Kowagenda through meeting Soivelin during his long years of wandering about the lands in his effort to end the eternal conflict waging across the face of Kowagenda. There you go. Elmer Fudd reading Hunters. It was a dark and quiet night when a black star fell from the night sky and crashed into the home of an alderman. Wakened by the thunderous breaking of roof tiles and timbers, the alderman leapt out of bed to see what had happened. There, on the floor, was a charred black rock, no wider than the length of a footprint, oozing a sticky goo. The ooze started to spread upon the floor, and that is when the alderman made a terrible mistake. The alderman gathered up the rock and took it into the woods at the end of the village, where he buried it, while his wife scrubbed up the ooze left on the floor. She placed a rug over the dark, odd stain the ooze had left, despite her best efforts to clean them away. With the great harvest beginning that morning, there was no time to have the roof properly repaired, so the alderman clambered up onto the roof and quickly covered the hole. It was these simple, sensible acts that brought doom to Rookery Hollow. As was the custom, the alderman's wife brought wonderful wild-berry jam and cream cake rolls every day that was praised by everyone. They had a strange and unknown flavor to them that lingered long in the delighted memories of the last good days before doom descended. It was at this time that I arrived in Rookery Hollow. Christopher Perk's Journal, page 10. Something evil came to Rookery Hollow. Something with no name and no fear. Something that was a tireless hunger. It squirmed its way into the lives of villagers, yet no one knew where it was or where it dwelled. As I sat within the local alehouse, the village madman came in screaming, "There's wickedness in the woods!" But everyone just laughed and ignored him. Sadly, so did I. A couple of days later, peculiar things began to happen. The village cleric locked herself in her chapel with no reason given. People began changing in ways their families could not explain. These people began to waste away a noticeable bit every day until, when they died, they were little more than a hollow shell of skin on bone. Not until I saw such a death did I start to talk to and follow the village madman. He babbled on and took me all over the village before he led me into the woods, taking care to hide from the affected villagers. We eventually came to a strange purple-barked vine, thick as a tree, and holding a dozen dark purple gourds the size of coffins. One of the afflicted wandered over to a gourd where a very thin vine uncoiled and reached out and touched the poor villager. With a contented smile on his face, the poor man withered before our eyes, then got up and staggered away. As the horror of witnessing such a thing waned within me, I drew my rapier and charged the gourd. I never made it, as one of those horrible thin vines suddenly touched me, and my mind was no longer my own. I don't know what happened from then until the madman was standing over me as I lay on the ground. He was covered with a purple, oozing sap, and every gourd was smashed and the vine chopped into pieces. Gnarled purple roots twisted with a fresh dirt near a newly churned up hole in the ground. When I asked him what had happened, he held out pieces of a strange black and hollow rock. "Never bury a fallen star. Smash it," was all he ever said. Christopher Perk's Journal, page 11. The great harvest is the last harvest of the season. Men work together at each other's farms, plots, and orchards to bring in the last of the bounty. Women cooked and brewed teas to fortify the men during the rush of getting in the last harvest. Girls were left to tend to the younger children by running games and races. The older boys, not yet big enough to work the harvest with the men, hauled water and firewood. It was the busiest time of the year, as it was a race to get in all they could from plantings that ripened so near the first frosts of the coming winter that would ruin them. There was no time for the making of repairs. Even patching a roof was put off until the great harvest, though a quick bit of thatch on canvas to keep out most of the rain was done. It is a tradition for the prominent women of a village during the great harvest to bring something special to serve during the hectic days of harvesting. Fancy jams, gravies, sauces, breads, and desserts were the things most often brought. And how well they were received by the rest of the village was a matter of deep pride to these prominent women. Bards, especially those young and not renowned enough to have yet secured a patron, as was Christopher Perk, try to find a place to earn a winter's stay with their talents. Villagers are always willing to put up a bard who listens to their stories and shares their songs, as well as bringing them new tales and songs to see them through the winter. As long as a mad person was harmless, they were cared for by village folk, though that care often came with ridicule. Harming one was a great sin, unless there was a very good reason to do so, as madness was considered a godly punishment mortals were not meant to interfere with. Sometimes their madness can prove to be a salvation, and they become a hero. It is not only tradition to break a fallen black star, but a law to bring the pieces to the reigning lord of the land. Those who do are praised and rewarded as heroes. or stopping a harvest of horror before it could be planted. Elyon Matiel, an elf raised in the city of Arelon. Elyon Matiel was never used to money. Growing up poor was tough, especially as an orphan. Nobody really seemed to care. Always treated as an inconvenience and under people's feet. Elyon soon learned to fend for himself, and was blessed with a sharp mind and quick wit. However, hard life treated him, though he always seemed to care about the well-being of others. Perhaps due to a desire for others to not go through the things he had to endure. This would shine through on one particularly wet, cold, and grim day, when he happened upon a human girl, filthy head to toe, seemingly not had a wash in days. This girl was Janie Lyradel. She had been in and out of various homes, an orphan just like Elyon, and had been kicked out on the streets a week before. She looked deathly pale, frozen to the core, and so starved she was just skin and bone. He simply took one look at her, smiled, and said, "It's going to be okay, do not worry." And with an outstretched hand, raised her up out of the mire of the gutter and took her to a small abandoned house on a back street. He found what rags he could, and a bucket of water, and he started to care for her. Once she had cleaned herself up and dried herself off, Elyon slipped out of the house to go to the market just around the corner. He used his skills learned from growing up on the streets to acquire some fruit and a few scraps of other food totally unnoticed, and took this back to Janie. He did this over the course of some days, gently nursing her back to health, something she was incredibly grateful for. This had been the time in her life, the first time, that anyone had ever shown any concern for her, let alone took the time to care for her. They became firm friends from this point on, and they both grew to care about each other greatly, and eventually became lovers. They continued living by their wits for some time, and this, up to this point, the best time of Elyon's and Janie's life, they both had each other, and nothing in the world could bring them down. Sure, they had to beg, steal, and borrow to survive, but as long as they were together, life was good. During this time, they both started to learn the many ways in and out of the city that no one else would ever notice, to get around Arelon unseen, and learned how to slip into the shadows at a moment's notice. They began to get acquainted with many others in a similar position, and also one or two of the more charitable residents in the area that would occasionally give them food. Sometimes, if they were lucky, people would take pity on them, even give them a hot bath and clean their clothes. Although this may have been more due to their smell than pity, no matter, it was taken with gratitude nonetheless. The knowledge of the city would come useful in 5 years later, during the Great Siege, when the city was cut off from supplies and to the point of starvation. Elyon once more saw Janie reach almost to the state in which they first met, something that disturbed him greatly as he cared for her so much. So, he started to do something about it. There was next to no food in the city that he could steal, but there was an enemy camp just outside the walls that was well stocked with supplies. He knew all the routes in and out, even some little drains and tunnels that were almost forgotten, and he knew how to remain unseen. This he would put to good use, running in and out to steal food from the besiegers, an endeavor that went on for some weeks, and gradually people learned what he was doing.
What started with a desire to just feed Janie and himself grew to feeding others in need. This expanded to other essential supplies, and Elyon reached the point where he needed help carrying the loot. So one or two others joined him in his efforts. Over time, they became an established group with Elyon as their leader. Janie also, once a physical state had recovered a bit, became his right hand, so to speak. Everyone looked to them for help. They were asked for food, medical supplies, and all sorts of other much-needed items. They did the best they could, but not everything was able to be retrieved. Once or twice, the enemy managed to spot them and chase them off, but Elyon always stayed unseen. Once a crossbow bolt struck its target, and one of the raiders was killed. And this hit the group hard, but losses were a risk of stealing from an enemy laying siege to the city. After almost 2 months of the siege, reinforcements were able to reach them and drive off the opposing army, and as Arelon was free once more, Elyon, Janie, and his group were hailed as heroes. Without them, many more would surely have died, and Arelon, capital of Eblery, may have even been surrendered. As a reward for their actions during the conflict, the couple were given the house that they had been staying in as their now official home, and the city paid for it to be renovated. All those involved in the raids and the supplies were given medals of bravery as recognition for their achievements. But the city was not quite out of the woods yet. Much damage had been done by enemy siege agents, such as catapults and trebuchet, and things needed to be rebuilt. People had lost their homes, and the problem of homeless people had increased. So ever the one to put the needs of others first, Elyon got his group together once more and started helping to get supplies to those who needed it the most, this time being officially sanctioned by the city authorities. For this, they were paid well, but things started to change for some of the group as time went on. One or two of them started getting greedy, and certain items were going missing. This was barely enough to be noticed, but as is the way with greed, this started to get worse. Also, corruption started setting in, and those greedy ones started taking money on the side to drop off supplies to those who paid enough coin first. Elyon was oblivious to this, to start with. But questions and rumors soon began spreading. When news of this corruption reached Elyon and Janie, they were both furious and extremely upset, insulted that their charitable work had been tainted in such a way. But he did not have proof who was dirty and who was clean, so he had to be cautious. Some were still loyal to the original charitable cause and wanted to help bring these thieves and extortionists to justice, and began laying certain little traps to catch these people out. These didn't take long, and Elyon soon had a list of names he could take to the authorities to expose those involved and have them arrested. Once he had the list of names, Elyon decided to sleep on it, being late and needing sleep. Then go to the castle in the morning and put his case forward. As he left his house, all was quiet. A little too quiet. Yet right outside his front door were 5 faces he recognized. These were the people that worked for the Matiel Syndicate, as the group had become known, and all were on his list. All these men had swords drawn, waiting for him to step outside his door. Elyon was barely able to utter a word before he was brutally cut down and left to die, while the men then entered the house moments later, as Elyon was breathing his very last breaths. They came back out, dragging with them his wife, the love of his life, poor Janie, with them. They made him watch helplessly as they drove a sword through her throat and left them both there to die. From this moment on, the charitable work that had created the syndicate ended, and the organization took a much darker turn.
Okay, I had read this one, Celebration of Children, earlier in the week, and realized there was a certain voice I needed to do this in, especially because of the way it ends. So we're going to give this one a shot here. Take a quick drink. In Old Quirinal, the celebration of children's ceremony is traditionally observed after the harvest, in the last week of autumn and on the third day of the week. After the twin Quirinal catastrophes, the soil in the Quirinal Concordance Zone became famously infertile. Despite the lack of local agriculture, Quirinalos eagerly celebrated every holiday possible in their own inimitable style. Every child born during the year since the last celebration is brought to the temple or church of each of the gods. Each baby receives a blessing and a small gift appropriate to that deity. The combination of ceremonies throughout this special day provides enough divine protection to ward the children until their coming-of-age ceremony when they enter adolescence. Throngs of parents, dressed in their finest clothing, bring their babies to every church and shrine in the temple district. The children, dressed in white gowns, receive blessings from every god. Gongs and bells sound, the air smells of incense, and the alms boxes fill up. The blessings of the gods serve an important functional purpose: protection from spirits that inhabit the zone along with the mortal races. Producing enough charms to protect all the children born in a year is a massive undertaking. The annual celebration gives each clergy enough time to make everything they need for that year. Some examples of the blessings and gifts include: the Church of Sun and Moon charges them with holy light and gives them a mooncake and a solar charm. The Church of Anum administers the fivefold blessing and presents a scapular of protection. The Temple of Balatha bestows the saltwater baptism and a bracelet of braided stingray leather. After the procession, children and parents return home to a great feast prepared for them by their families. Named for a Moldavian tradition that the Kyrillanos have adopted, food and drink flow freely into the night as they celebrate and sigh in relief. New parents in the zone face an unpleasant fact of life head-on when their children are born. The zone is rife with spirits and supernatural beings, both light and dark. The most unpleasant: hags, aswang, and vampire spawn. See mortal children as particular delicacies. Every home and building in the zone is warded against minor spirits, but newborn children smell especially delicious, attracting the worst kind of extra attention. New parents who can't afford the extra wards either move on to holy grounds, like a house of worship, move in with their friends and family, or leave the zone entirely until their children can receive the celebration ceremonies. Abjurers live in each neighborhood, paid by the residents to put up small wards and protections on every home. They have to charge extra for natal wards to prevent incursions by hungry, powerful spirits. Children who have not been through the celebration cannot leave their homes at night. During the celebration, they visit each Kinderfest celebration in their territory to check each child and home for the last time. They join the feast and accept their final payment from the grateful families. They visit new residents to explain the importance of protecting their homes with wards and the vital importance of having extra wards on the homes of infants. Some parents in the zone don't believe in the protective measures undertaken by everyone else. Some refuse to believe in the power of the withdrawn gods or think that dark spirits don't really exist. Others believe that they are strong enough to protect their children themselves. They are wrong. When night falls, their unwarded homes often avoid misfortune for many months. Unfortunately for them, they are eventually awakened to an empty crib. In the worst cases, the entire family disappears in the night, only blood-spattered walls and floors left behind where a happy family once dwelled. Happy, happy. Okay, gang. This one I am actually doing in honor of somebody. Sir Thomas Sean Connery died this morning. Halloween, October 31st. I've always been a huge fan of Connery, from his early James Bonds to later just fun roles. Look, a lot of people say League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is not a great movie. I actually liked it. But, I mean, you can just rattle off movie after movie that Connery has done. And he's always a focus. Even the ones that weren't that great. So, in his honor, I'll be reading this article as Sean Connery. I hope I do him justice. This is The Quirinal Pit.
The Quirinal Pit. Shatter dawns and the pit flashes through a rainbow of colors. The defender's hands grip his weapon fight tighter when the flash is red or black, or, gods forbid, yellow. Will it be an army of demons, a wall screaming fresh, or a parade of fairies today? A hole, in reality 30 miles wide, ringed by walls and fortresses and cities. The Quirinal Pit is both greatest threat and the greatest resource in the world. Every day at dawn, a different plane from the great wheel and beyond manifests itself within the confines of the pit. The days of the week have been renamed according to which plane intersects on that day. Shatter is the first day of the week. Shatter's name comes from the night of the shattered moon. Any plane that has a chance of appearing before the creation of the orrery of worlds, random planes would appear for random amounts of time. Now the orrery's design includes only one day of chaos in exchange for order every other day of the week. Shattered on. The great fortresses prepare for war. The troops stand ready. On the wall, the sky ships float overhead. Weapons turn toward the pit. The streets of the embassies, cities, empty as the populace hides in shelters, waiting for the horns to sound. One blast for peace, two for war, three to flee. As the sun cracks the horizon, the entire pit flashes through a rainbow of hues before settling on one color. The Quirinal divers take to the air from Chagros Tower on the northern edge. Surveyor of worlds, the soul forge known as Two, makes the call and the horns sound. Elemental. On the second day, one of the elemental planes manifests. Normally a day for trade or recreation, the merchants of the pit can exchange goods in the city of brass or negotiate with the courtiers of the citadel of ice and steel. Genasi often serve as the go-betweens for the two realms that they call home. Crossbreeds between mortal races and extraplanar visitors are common and referred to as pit blood. Red flames streak into the sky at dawn. A wave of intense dry heat turns winter into summer. Towers of gold climb into the sky, and fiery beasts streak into the air. Bells ring along the walls and crowds gather on both sides of the gate for the visit. The city of brass has arrived. Shadow. Day 3 ushers in a time of caution. the denizens of the Shadowfell arrive. Underneath the Treaty of Passage, they cannot cross into the border, into this world, but beings of shadow are not known for following mortal rules. The wards on the wall suffice to keep all but the most powerful at bay. Shadow sneaks in with the fog. The darkness of night shifts slightly. An obscured sun rises. A deep horn blares, the base of it pulsing up from the ground through your feet. The defenders on the wall carried silver weapons. They wear necklaces of garlic and wolfsbane. The gates open. The shadow merchants ready to trade. The predators ready to feast. Only the brave, the foolhardy, or the hopeless brave, the darkness. The Treaty of Trade, the Colonel Pit, while massively dangerous, was also an incredible opportunity for interplanar trade. Over the centuries, they have established trade treaties with most of the elemental powers. The Treaty of Passage. After centuries of war between Losar and the Shadowfell, the last Tridenser king made a peace treaty with the Raven Queen and other Lords of Shadows. The creatures of Shadow are forbidden from crossing into the world. In exchange, any who wish it cannot be prevented from walking into the Shadowfell. Prime. On the fourth day, the pit manifests another mortal world. Next to Shatter, Prime is the most unpredictable day. The orrery is not always exact, and the folk of the pit, the Kirinalos, have discovered that mortal worlds and mortal people can be just as dangerous as the demons of the abyss. Kirinalos wait with cautious anticipation for the horns to sound. The navigator steers the orrery and another world of the Prime appears. He has a few seconds to choose the manifestation point. Treaty worlds have a designated point, but if it's a strange plane, he errs on the side of caution. Sometimes what appears safe is anything but. Bifrost. The fifth day is usually a day of rest for the people of the pit. The pit becomes a portal. The entire expanse, a doorway into the ethereal or astral planes. The sun climbs into the blue sky as a night sky opens up inside the pit. Rainbows arc into infinity, and the walkers prepare to journey. The hopeful wait at the gates, praying to the withdrawn gods that their loved ones will return. Crystal spheres and strange horizons. Most worlds that manifest come from crystal spheres similar to Arathia. They usually have differing combinations of familiar races and monsters. They are worlds with names like Toril and Earth, Arthas and Kryn. Some worlds differ oddly, populated by humans or strange creatures with wildly varying levels of technology. A stunning variety of places from across the dimensions manifest with names like Coruscant and London, Rivendell and Gotham. Rainbow Road's home. Named after the Asgardian Bifrost, Rainbow Roads throughout the plains arc through the ethereal and astral. Bifrost is a day of returning. Savi Kirinalos, lost in the dimensions, know how to follow the rainbow home. Every Bifrost returnees missing for weeks or months or years arrive home. Farry. On the sixth day, by treaty, the pit opens on the market in the Feywild. The mortal man asks, which market are we in this week? Fairy merchants always respond, "The market. There's only one, you silly mortal." The elf walks by with a sly grin, perfectly at home. Heaven. On day 7, the heavens open up. One of the upper planes manifests in the Carinal pit. The withdrawn gods make their presence known. Their worshippers know that they still watch over the creation. The divine gate still stands between the world and directly godly intervention. The troops and the wizards defending the world stand down for a day. They rest, for tomorrow brings shatter. Vibrant horns sound over the hymns of the faithful. The largest crowds of the week gather. The bright sun cracks the horizon of a clear blue sky. With a cheer, the gates open. Everyone who wants gets to go to heaven for a day. Pilgrimage. On the 7th day, pilgrims from all over the world time their journey to arrive at the Carinal pit on heaven. They seek healing or to commune with the withdrawn gods. Fortresses and concordant zones. Each fortress and the city aligned with it is run by a different grouping of the concordance for survival. The fortress, city, and land are embassy territory owned by the members of each grouping. Shoggoth's Tower. This tower houses the orrery of Kirinal, the mechanism that controls the manifestation of planes through the Kirinal pit. The tower is the linchpin around which the rest of the world rotates. Wizards and Eldritch Knights freshly graduated from Wizards Peak University serve a 2-year tour of duty here. Fortress of Kirinal, manned by the horse lords of the Red Plains and the archers of the Duchy of Aro. Citadel of Anam, the clerics of the Church of Anam and the paladins of the Order of Tridensers provide strategic and religious leadership for the Carinal pit. Many soul-forged, fresh from the soul-forged, choose to serve here. Bulwark of Light. The Order of Light commands the bulwark for the human and tiefling lords of the Grand Duchy of Mondal. They see the pit as the ultimate resource to fill their coffers and expand their power. Embassy of Hell. The official ambassador of Asmodeus has his offices here. Skarhir Kos. The dwarves of the kingdom of Nathal Nalir in the Iron Spike Mountains stand strong against chaos. Their proudest engineering feat is that their motorized city, the Tortoise, that moves 10 miles further from or closer to the fortress, depending on the day. Tol Aharn, the elves of the kingdom of Amredel, and the druids of the Duchy of Tarvit keep watch over the southwestern rim. They manage the insanity of the anomalous forest and the river of Kirinal. Bastion of Borthakar. The Orcish Empire of Borthakar savagely defends their section of the pit. Fortification of Kiris. The arcane nation of Kiris is led by dark elf wizards, necromancers, and sorcerers. They wield an army of goblinkin, bond soldiers, undead, and monsters in defense of the world. Geography. Before the disintegration, Kirinal was a land of rolling hills and lush forests. The Kirinal River flowed through it all. Now, only the river remains, flowing into the pit on its northeastern edge, but also flowing up unnaturally from the southwestern edge. More than 200 years after the disintegration and the explosion, the lands around Kirinal are a wasteland of broken hills covered with strange forests. The Kitoypoy River flows in clean from the north. The waters flow out from the southern edge, tainted or blessed by the plane of the day. Fauna and flora, the natural wildlife of Kitoypoy, suffered mightily after an onslaught of apocalypses every few decades. Only the mightiest trees and the craftiest animals survived, even thrived under the circumstances. Here and there in the wasteland, pockets of natural landscapes, oak and elm, or huts and bors persist, usually under the protection of druid groves. Invasive species. The wastelands around Kitoypoy harbour a cacophony of strange beasts and plants from all the varied plains. The walls and wards, patrols and treaties keep out most large beasts and intelligent creatures. Small animals, birds, and seeds are another matter. Kitoypoys know to be cautious when they are travelling. They know that entering the wastelands unprepared is a death sentence. Anomalous forest. The southwestern wilderness of Kitoypoy is completely unpredictable. The waters of the Kitoypoy River flow up out of the pit's rim, carrying the detritus of other planes into the world every day. Over the decades, the anomalous forest emerged from the banks of the river with the greatest concentration of new unpredictable species around the pit. The elves and druids of Tol Ahan do their best to balance and manage the lands under their purview. Hunters flock to the bulwark of light for the chance to hunt the interplanar beasts on the land managed by the Order of Light.
As we enter, we can see the room extends only about 15 units to the left of this entrance before coming to a 30-unit wall. The ceiling is a good 10 units from the floor, and the back wall has to be almost the size of a football field, or 120 units. This place is absolutely huge. To the right of the door is a large observation room with another door on the far side. It still only takes up 20 units of the wall, leaving the other 100 units to be covered with what looks to be computers or various electronic equipment. The ceiling above us seems to be a very large tank-like structure, with slotted windows showing the contents of the containers. The reason it seemed so small when we first got here was the tank and its several tubes. We came into this room from the absolute wrong place to appreciate its size. John laughs as he opens the door to the observation room and gestures for us to follow. He again enters the room after we do. With another grand gesture, his smile brightens, and he simply states, "Welcome to my true home away from home." He sits in a worn chair and adjusts it slightly before typing at the keyboard wedged into his space there. People just don't truly appreciate old tech. It can be very hard to type on a sheet of glass. Sometimes the body needs the comfort of knowing just what it's doing without input from the brain. This way, I can think a little ways ahead of where I'm typing. Makes it easier to write code which works the first time. Touch slower, yes, but I'm not that much slower than anybody else. His eyes lose focus as his fingers begin moving fast enough. It is difficult to see the individual digits of his hand. clack of the keyboard as a steady beat sounded like a motor running fast, well into cruising. The worldview rocks and suddenly snaps into focus as we look around to see what's going on. Come on, sleepyhead. Sorry programming is so boring. We have a meeting to attend. You'll want to be in on this. Besides, finish the monitoring and adjustment programs I think we'll need, so let's go see how well I guess this time, eh? John opens the door in the back wall of the observation room to the hall by Steve's room. Agnes and Rose are entering the door Steve said was a supply closet. John catches the door before it closes and holds it open for us to enter as we drift higher than their heads to get a good overall view. We refuse to focus on Agnes and avoid the one Steve identified as Isabel as well. Agnes smirks at us before dropping her eyes to Gloria. And a portly man I'm guessing is Trevor. We shall see how correct I am. After the door shuts, there's a soft click of the door securing itself, and the man starts speaking. We aren't hearing anything, though. I'm curious, so we dip closer. Agnes taps her shoulder, and we come down to perch on her shoulder. About an arm's length above her head, we start hearing the man speaking, but the word is strangely garbled and unintelligible. Then Gloria begins speaking as we settle into the familiar spot on Agnes's shoulder.
What we have here is an awkward revelation, a major breakthrough, yes. However, Trevor,
Gloria gestures to the man beside her,
has agreed not to send a report to the organization just yet. We're going to see what progress we can make over the next 2 weeks with this new setup. Just a regular report with some requests for more material is going out in 3 weeks. Now, I've made a few adjustments to my own experiments, and I've already talked with, all around, everyone who needs to know of my changes. Please be brief and succinct in your reports, as the field has a little less power today.
She turns and glares at a man with a messy mop of hair. The man shuffles his feet, looks down at the floor with flushed cheeks before mumbling, nothing to contribute. He continues to stare at his feet, as if trying to nail them to the floor. Rose speaks up next.
Please, be aware that we also have a legitimate observer among us right now, so let us also introduce ourselves if they have not met with you yet.
She nods at Agnes's shoulder and continues.
The laser delivery system will need to be replaced today if we are going to continue at the new scale. I anticipate no more than 2 hours at best, and all day at worst. It will largely depend on the quality of the focusing lenses. Perhaps John or Karen should go next, as they will be working together for much of these next weeks.
Rose steps back, and John suddenly leaps forward with a startled squawk. Well, I've done some work on the lens keepers, and they can now follow some simple verbal input, up to 4 simultaneous manual inputs, dials, and we can set no more than 8 variations based on sensor feedback from what is happening. He rubs his bottom and glares at Rose. That will hopefully be enough for the new parameters, but it's also a modular build, so I can adjust it close to live updates if we really need that much control. As he steps back, Rose, glare directed at her look of innocence, Karen steps forward.
No dials need adjusting, but the flip-zang is going to be the hardest as the flow will fluctuate too much until we dial in the right wording. We need the windows washed and a fresh install.
She spins on her heel and walks back to stand by Gloria, nervously twisting at her buttons again. Agnes whispers as Isabel steps forward.
It's so hard to fathom how she came into being 3 whole months before I did. Just goes to show, Mother Nature is always willing to one-up us when it comes to creative ideas.
It's impossible to miss Agnes's purposely crossing her arms under her breast to lift them up and emphasize them. Isabel flushes at the wink Agnes gives her and digs a toe at the floor. It takes a few moments to compose herself before she speaks. Having found her composure, Isabel looks up.
After reviewing the recording, it's clear the marble definitely reacted to the motion of John's hand. I've asked him about what he was thinking at the time as well, and it seems there was indeed a correlation in a small part, so I'm going to need a few days to come up with a meditation regime for our big final experiment to get everyone on the same page.
A flicker of her eyes goes to Karen, and Isabel sighs.
I'm estimating we have around 12 grams of material left at this point, and it will be best to do it 2 days before our 3-week window. For some reason, we are slightly lower on some of the granules than others, so I will be putting in an extra request to balance the difference to this new ratio.
Isabel is bouncing slightly on the walls by her feet. By the end of the report, it's being very distracting in the rhythmic sway of her body. She seems to suddenly realize this and clamps her arms over her chest so she can move faster to get back to her spot in the meeting. Before Agnes can do more than shift her weight, Steve steps forward.
I've been doing the ratios incorrectly so far,
and the amounts have been too high to get to more than a cursory reaction before. I, too, have analyzed the recordings, and there are no emissions from the marble we formed yesterday. Not until John swipes his fingers through the air, that is. Marble was considerably bigger than the volume which formed it, so we'll have to be careful about how much we try to form from now on. It grew roughly 3,000% before dropping back to 5 times the original volume. This means we'll be well within safety maximum parameters with the new sample size. Oh, I'm sure Agnes can enlighten us on the updated ratios that Rose hinted at. Steve smiles, and he steps back into the loose circle, absently patting Isabel's hand to calm her and quiet the bouncing. Agnes looks pointedly at Steve before bouncing her chest off her arms and stepping forward a little bit. All right, I'll stop teasing, even though I'm bursting with excitement. She clears her throat with a couple of soft coughs. Even with the new ratios we're going to use, we won't run out of a primary ingredient before we run out of tertiary granules. More importantly, I'm also building a jiggle rig so we can program in a few measured movements, a couple random ones as well. This result seems to be beyond what we thought it was going to be. She turns to look each person in the eye. I have no idea what these things will accomplish, but I feel it is worth noting a hand gesture was enough to disperse a completely stable marble. Done speaking, Agnes steps back smoothly, turning to look at the man with large eyes because he's said nothing yet. The man steps forward as smoothly as Agnes moves and smiles at her. Now, what would you have to contribute to the project? He turns to Isabel. Lovely Isabel, you're going to have to trust Uncle Ned with this. But we need to get more of the exotics, as they seem to be reaching critical mass on falling apart. We should have enough to last the 3 weeks, but we'll just have a bunch of scraps left over afterwards if we don't get more mass to help stabilize the exotics. Isabel mutters something under her breath, which sounds like Zen mode, or maybe it was Xenon. It wasn't really clear, but Ned's smile vanishes as she begins pouting. Well, I want to experiment longer than just the 3 weeks. This group of people is almost as entertaining as the exotics we keep in a lab. In a huff and stamp at his feet, Ned returns to his spot in the circle. The man with the messy mop of hair, it has to be Nick, as everyone else has identified themselves already, nervously clears his throat. If I may add to what Ned has said, the Zen is going to mode everything, and by the grace of the flow, we will know the solution to our problems. Nick nervously giggles. Sorry, I thought that was quite clever. He smiles and puffs out his chest. Just as quickly, his chest deflates, and he's back to being nervous. Actually, Would the Exonics benefit from an ionizing pulse run through their containment unit, either on the outer layer or through the interior? I ask because I'm not really sure if I had a good idea or not. He turns and faces us, locking his eyes on our viewport. I'm Nick, just in case you didn't already figure that out. Gloria opens her mouth to respond when there's a flash of light and a shower of sparks that runs through the air. She sighs heavily and shrugs her shoulders. Looks like we can find out about the light show later on next week, Nick. She gives a feeble smile and another shrug before heading out of the supply closet. Once out in the hallway, Agnes gently picks up and hands us back to John. Back to the lab, it seems, as John wants to run a few tests right away. He begins by making sure all the code screens have the right settings and algorithms on them before sending in a specific order to the chamber, and watches the monitor showing the insides of the chamber intently. He grunts in satisfaction before shutting down everything just before Rose comes in. And we'll stop there.